In October of 2022, the Portuguese government made an announcement that they were now offering something called a digital nomad visa. This visa allowed people who were working completely remote to move to Portugal and live here for longer than what a typical vacation visa would allow. Remote work was at an all-time high in 2022, given the COVID pandemic moved many jobs to be fully online. This visa was relatively easy to qualify for and was enticing for many foreigners who wanted to live in what they viewed as a tropical paradise. Portugal has beautiful cities with rich history like Porto and its capital Lisbon, as well as some of the best beaches and surfing in the world off the coasts of towns like Nazaré and Peniche. The weather never gets too cold and there's sunshine almost year-round. Not to mention, the cost of living is very low, 44% cheaper than London and 58% cheaper than New York, two cities where many of these digital nomads are moving from. From the scenery, to the culture, to the weather, and even to the low cost of living, from an outsider's perspective, Portugal seems like the perfect place to live. But behind the scenes of this tropical paradise is actually an absolute economic disaster. Portugal is slowly dying as a country. The numbers don't lie. Portugal ranks second to last in the whole European Union in terms of GDP per capita, only beating Greece. To make matters worse, from 2019 to 2024, the median home price has jumped 50%, making it extremely difficult for lower class and even middle class workers to afford rent or buy a home. The average monthly rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Portugal is now standing at 1,200 euros a month, which equates to 1,330 US dollars. Given the fact that the average monthly salary in Portugal is just 1,833 euros a month, the average Portuguese worker would have to give up well over half of their salary just to afford a one-bedroom place. Many economists recommend setting aside 30% of your income towards housing, and in Portugal, most residents are having to put close to double this towards their monthly rent and mortgages. Housing has become so unaffordable to most Portuguese residents that the country now ranks third to last in the world in a house price to income ratio, just ahead of New Zealand and the Czech Republic. With all this in mind, Portugal now has one of the fastest declining populations in Europe. This trend is projected to only continue, where by 2100, Portugal's population is expected to nearly cut in half. With these scary economic numbers in one of Europe's most beautiful countries, you're probably wondering what exactly went wrong to send Portugal into this massive economic down spiral. In 2022, when Portugal came out with their new digital nomad visa, this attracted a new crowd. This visa was unique in that it was not available to people already living in a country that was part of the European Union. With this in mind, it seemed like Portugal was looking for people from the Americas to move there and work remotely, rather than other Europeans already close by. The number of digital nomads and remote workers had dramatically jumped with the pandemic, and now in 2022, Portugal was looking to target this group of remote workers. They weren't just targeting any remote workers though. The Portuguese government was mainly looking for higher net worth individuals. Another requirement of qualifying for this visa was that you had to be making more than 3,280 euros a month or 3,635 US dollars. This is already far higher than the average monthly salary in Portugal, which is 1,833 euros a month or 2,032 US dollars. Given how high the cost of living has become in countries like the United States and England, many entrepreneurs and remote workers became very intrigued by this new opportunity to live in Portugal. During this time, Portugal also targeted cryptocurrency connoisseurs. For years, Portugal has been seen as one of the most crypto tax-friendly countries in the world, where long-term holders of crypto can avoid paying taxes on their investments by living in this country. Although Portugal implemented a short-term capital gains tax on crypto sales under 1 year of 28%, Portugal's long-term capital gains tax on crypto still remains 0%. Unlike Portugal, most countries like the United States and England tax long-term gains on cryptocurrency. Americans with large cryptocurrency holdings saw this, and many of them applied for Portugal's digital nomad visa in hopes of being able to sell their holdings in Portugal and avoid taxes on their sale. Since this policy has been implemented in 2022, over 2,600 of these digital nomad visas have been issued. Today in 2024, there's estimated to be roughly 16,000 digital nomads in Lisbon alone. Most of these digital nomads come from the countries of the United States, England, and Brazil. The Portuguese government was welcoming these high-earning digital nomads with open arms, but the actual long-term residents of Portugal had a different view. With this rapid influx of higher net worth individuals, this led the overall cost of living to dramatically increase in a very short time frame. Everything from groceries to restaurants to entertainment, and especially rent, began increasing in price to tailor towards this new influx of digital nomads with higher salaries. From 2020 to 2023, it's believed that roughly 60,000 Portuguese citizens were forced to leave their homes in Lisbon and move to the more affordable regions of Portugal. It's said that the residents living in the capital of Lisbon have already noticed that you don't hear anything when the national team scores goals anymore. Their massive stadium in the center of the city has already had a massive drop in ticket sales, with the foreigners living in the city and the longtime citizens moving out to the more rural areas of Portugal. Portugal also now has one of the lowest fertility rates across all of Europe, at just 1.35 births for each woman. This is far below the European Union average at 1.53 and well below the actual replacement rate, which is 2.1 births for every woman. At this dramatically low birth rate, this will only contribute to Portugal's inevitable collapse. Low fertility rates typically correlate with a bad economy. When couples barely have enough money to support themselves, they're far less likely to decide to have children. When few children are being born, this lowers the number of available workers in a country, which obviously only hurts a rapidly declining economy. Not to mention, many of these digital nomads moving to Portugal typically only intend to be here for a few years. Very few of them are moving here with the intentions of starting a family and bringing new life into the Portuguese economy. In the mid-2010s, short-term vacation rental companies like Airbnb started purchasing many of the homes and apartments in Lisbon. These housing units owned by Airbnb typically aren't cheap and almost always house tourists rather than the citizens of Portugal. Of Lisbon's 320,000 total dwellings, 48,000 of them are vacant and another 20,000 of them are owned by Airbnb. Putting aside the number of Airbnb units for a moment, this number of vacancies, taking up 15% of the total housing units, is an extremely alarming statistic for any major city. Just to put this in perspective, in 2024, New York City had a vacancy rate of 1.4%, Los Angeles 3.3%, London 0.89%, Paris 1.3%, and Berlin just 2.9%. Lisbon's office vacancy rate isn't much better at 9.3% in 2023, meaning many office buildings aren't being rented out either. This goes to show how many Portuguese citizens are moving out of cities like Lisbon and are searching for more affordable housing options in rural areas and even in other countries. Now you would think with these disastrous numbers and the country in decline, hopefully Portugal has competent leaders in their government working to get the country back on track. With a combination of Portugal's high tourism levels, prime geographical location, and rich history, you would think a country with these unique opportunities could turn itself around with the right leadership. Well, unfortunately for the Portuguese, their government has had a long history of corruption. In a 2015 Ernst & Young survey, 83% of Portugal residents responded saying they believed there was widespread corruption and bribery within their country's government. Several high-profile politicians have been involved in corruption cases in the past couple years. One of the most notable figures being former Prime Minister of Portugal, José Sócrates, who was arrested in 2014 on charges of corruption, money laundering, and tax fraud. José was the Prime Minister of Portugal from 2005 to 2011 and was found to have a secret 20 million euros stashed in a Swiss bank. Also in 2014, the second largest bank in Portugal, Banco Espírito Santo, completely collapsed, leaving all its clients to dry. This collapse was fueled by its leader Ricardo Salgado using his position as the owner to evade taxes and launder money. Ricardo was released from a Portuguese prison on a €3 million bail and escaped the country shortly after that. A combination of events like these have left the Portuguese citizens to have extremely low faith in their government's leadership. With this in mind, its citizens have taken to the streets to protest. These protests have centered around the issues of creating more affordable housing and the desire to increase wages. The monthly minimum wage in Portugal is just €822 a month, or $912. Many Portuguese citizens are making close to this minimum wage number, considering over half of Portugal's citizens make less than €1,000 a month, or $1,100. The Portuguese protesters argue that these wages aren't able to compete with the digital nomads' wages that are now entering the country. Just for context, since becoming a democracy in 1970, Portugal has had two dominant political parties. There's the more left-wing Socialist Party, and then the more right-wing Social Democrats. The Socialist Party has been the dominant force for the past couple decades, outperforming the Social Democratic Party. However, with the recent massive surges of immigration and stagnant wages, the political ideology in Portugal has been shifting right. In fact, in 2019, a new right-wing political party emerged known as the Chega Party. At its birth in 2019, this party was irrelevant, but just 5 years after its formation, Portugal is looking less and less like a two-party system. In 2022 and in 2024, Portugal had legislative elections across all the country's districts. In the 2022 election, the Socialist Party won the overwhelming majority of seats, 120 of them, followed by the Social Democratic Party gaining 77 seats, and the Chega Party falling far behind with just 12 seats. Fast forward 2 years later to the 2024 legislative election, and there's been a considerable shift. In this election, the Social Democratic Party actually won a slim majority with 80 seats, followed by the Socialists with 78 seats, and a dramatic increase in seats for the Chega Party at 50 total seats. Following this election, the Chega Party leader André Ventura came out saying that it's clear Portugal is no longer a two-party system. He also argued that the Social Democrats should ally with the Chega Party to create a total majority within the parliament. André Ventura became the leader of the Chega Party by running on the ideas of anti-establishment and national sovereignty. Ventura has also been advocating for much stricter immigration policies and harsher criminal penalties, including the reintroduction of the death penalty and life sentences. The Chega Party's slogan is now God, Country, Family, and Work, and it's a slogan that's growing fast in popularity across Portugal. Despite the Chega Party's attempt to unite with the Social Democrats, Luis Montenegro, the leader of the Social Democratic Party, has said that if he becomes prime minister, he promises to shut down the Chega Party and will refuse to negotiate with the right-wing policies. Despite the country being in a very poor spot economically, leaders from all three parties say that there's an opportunity for a rebound. Being on the western edge of Europe along the Atlantic Ocean, Portugal makes for a natural landing point for the transatlantic cables connecting Europe with North and South America. These cables are fiber optic cables that are placed deep under the ocean. This makes Portugal a crucial part of the global internet backbone, facilitating faster and more reliable data transmission. With this in mind, Portugal has begun investing heavily in state-of-the-art cable landing stations and more recently, data centers. As the internet continues to expand and data on its users becomes even more valuable, data centers become increasingly important for any developed country. Portugal's focus on expanding digital infrastructure can attract global tech companies, which create high-value jobs and can lead to more innovation. With these new digital nomads in mainly Lisbon and Porto, Portugal is becoming a growing hub for tech startups. These new tech startups can help stimulate the economy and create new jobs for low-skilled workers. While Portugal's population is certainly declining, a country that's far bigger than Portugal with even less people is known as Mongolia. In fact, Mongolia is the most sparsely populated country in the world, where there's just 2 people per square kilometer. You can find out why this country is so empty and why it seems like nobody wants to live in Mongolia in this video right here.